Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair watching the stars through the bridge windows of the Earth Defense Ship Liberty when the communication alert sounded. The message came through on the emergency channel that had never been used before. In his 10 years of service, the voice that spoke was cold and mechanical with the strange accent of the Xanthari Empire. This is High Command. Xanthari to Earth Defense Fleet. Your planet has been charged with 847 violations of galactic law. You will appear before the Supreme Tribunal within 30 standard days or face immediate quarantine and potential orbital bombardment. Compliance is not optional. Jake felt his stomach drop as he looked at his communications officer, Lieutenant Sam Parker, who had gone completely pale. The bridge fell silent except for the steady hum of the ship's engines. Jake had heard stories about the galactic courts, but Earth had always stayed out of their way. They kept to their own solar system and only ventured out when other species needed help. "Get me Admiral Kate Sullivan right now," Jake ordered. Within minutes, Admiral Sullivan's face appeared on the main screen. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her blue eyes showed the kind of worry that Jake had never seen before. Behind her stood Dr. Ben Carter, the chief scientist of Earth's space program, and Lisa Adams, their best diplomat. "Jake, I assume you got the message," Admiral Sullivan said without any greeting. "We're calling an emergency meeting on Earth. Get back here as fast as you can." "Admiral, what are these charges about?" Jake asked. "We've never attacked anyone or taken anything that didn't belong to us." Dr. Carter stepped forward and adjusted his glasses. "That's just it, Jake. The charges aren't about what we took. They're about what we gave and who we helped. Every single violation on that list is something we did to save lives." Lisa Adams nodded and her face looked grim. "The galactic laws are very strict about helping other species without permission. We've been breaking those laws for years, and now they want to put us on trial." Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "So we're criminals because we saved people?" "In their eyes, yes," Admiral Sullivan said. "The Xanthari Empire runs the galactic court system, and they believe order is more important than individual lives. They think we're dangerous because we put morality above their laws." The next few hours passed in a blur as Jake brought his ship back to Earth. He docked at the orbital station above North America and took a shuttle down to the defense headquarters in Colorado. The building was buzzing with activity as officers and civilians rushed around preparing for what everyone knew would be the most important trial in human history. In the main conference room, Jake found himself sitting at a large table with Earth's most important leaders. Admiral Sullivan sat at the head of the table while Dr. Carter had spread out dozens of files containing records of every mission Earth had undertaken in the past decade. Lisa Adams was on a video call with Ambassador Rick Johnson, who was already on his way to the trial location. "Let me read you some of these charges," Dr. Carter said as he opened the first file. "Violation 001 through 043, providing medical aid to quarantine worlds without proper authorization. Violation 044 through 156, sharing restricted technology with developing civilizations. Violation 157 through 298, interfering in internal conflicts. To prevent genocide." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "Those quarantined worlds had plagues that were killing millions. We had the cure, so we gave it to them." "The law says you need permission from the Galactic Health Council first," Lisa Adams explained. "That process takes years and millions would have died waiting." Admiral Sullivan stood up and walked to the large window overlooking the city below. "The Thraxian mining colonies that we freed from slavery. The Corvan refugees we sheltered when their homeworld was destroyed. The Melody children we saved with genetic therapy. Every act of kindness we've shown has been cataloged as a crime." Dr. Carter pulled out another file. "The worst part is they have complete records of everything we did. They've been watching US for years and documenting every law we broke. We can't deny any of it because it's all true." Jake looked around the room at the faces of people he respected and trusted. These were good people who had dedicated their lives to helping others, and now they were being called criminals by beings who had never lifted a finger to help anyone. "What happens if we're found guilty?" Jake asked quietly. "Complete isolation from galactic society," Lisa Adams answered. They'll destroy all our space stations and ships. They'll blockade our solar system so no one can come or go. Earth will be cut off from the rest of the galaxy forever. Admiral Sullivan turned back to face the room. And if we don't show up for the trial, they'll just start bombing us from orbit. The Xanthari have enough firepower to turn Earth into a dead rock. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of their situation. Jake thought about his wife and 2 children back home. He thought about all the species they had helped over the years and wondered if any of them would speak up for humanity. When the trial began, "So what do we do?" Jake asked. "We go to trial," Admiral Sullivan said firmly. "We tell the truth about what we did and why we did it. Maybe the court will understand that sometimes saving lives is more important than following rules." Dr. Carter closed his files and looked up. "I'll prepare all the evidence we need. Every person we saved and every life we protected. If we're going to be judged, then let them judge us for our compassion." As the meeting ended, Jake felt a strange mix of fear and pride. Earth was about to face the greatest challenge in its history. But they would face it with their heads held high. They had broken the law not for profit or power, but because it was the right thing to do. Whatever happened next, Jake knew that humanity would not apologize for choosing to help others when they needed it most. Commander Alex Turner was running his morning patrol around Earth's orbital defenses when the first alien ship appeared on his sensors. The vessel was small and battered with hull markings he recognized as Corvan. Alex had seen those ships before. During the refugee crisis 3 years ago, when Earth had defied quarantine orders to save thousands of Corvan families from their dying homeworld. "This is Commander Turner to unknown vessel," Alex broadcast. "State your business in Earth space." The reply came in broken English with the clicking sounds that Corvan throats made when they spoke. "Commander Turner, this is Captain Zek Mora of the refugee ship Hope's End. We come to speak for Earth at the trial. We owe humans our lives." Alex felt his heart skip a beat. The Corvan ship was followed by another, and then another. Within hours, his sensors were tracking dozens of alien vessels approaching Earth from every direction. Ships he had never seen before mixed with others he recognized from past missions. The communication channels filled with voices speaking in dozens of different languages, all saying the same thing. They had come to help Earth. Admiral Sullivan called an emergency meeting at the orbital command station. Alex docked his patrol ship and hurried to the briefing room where he found chaos. Officers were trying to coordinate with alien ships while diplomats attempted to translate messages from species that had never contacted Earth before. Dr. Emma Walsh, the chief xenobiologist, was standing at a large display showing the growing fleet around Earth. Her usually calm face showed amazement as she pointed to different groups of ships. "Alex, these are species from across the galaxy. Most of them have never worked together before, but they're all here for the same reason." "Which is what exactly?" Alex asked. "To testify on Earth's behalf," Admiral Sullivan said as she entered the room. "Every single ship out there represents people that humanity helped in violation of galactic law. The Xanthari are demanding they leave, but they're refusing to go." Alex looked at the display again and tried to count the ships. There had to be over 100 vessels of different sizes and designs. Some were civilian transports, while others looked like military escorts. A few were so alien that Alex couldn't even figure out which way they were facing. Lisa Adams appeared on the main screen from the diplomatic center. "Admiral, we're receiving testimony requests from over 200 species. They all want to speak at the trial about how Earth helped them. The Xanthari are furious because they never expected this kind of response." Dr. Walsh pulled up a list on her tablet. "The Melody colonists whose children we saved with illegal genetic therapy. The Thraxian miners we freed from corporate slavery. The Ythran plague victims we cured despite quarantine laws. Species we've never even heard of are coming forward with stories about human aid." Alex shook his head in wonder. How did they all find out about the trial so fast? "News travels quickly in space," Admiral Sullivan explained. "The Xanthari announced the charges publicly, thinking it would make an example of us. Instead, it brought every species we've ever helped rushing to our defense. A new voice crackled over the communication system. This one spoke perfect English with the musical tone of the ethereal race. Earth Command, this is Ambassador Thilvereth of the Ethereal Conclave. We formally request permission to add our testimony to your legal defense. The Ethereals remember when humans shared water purification technology during the Great Drought of Kepler Prime. Alex had been on that mission 5 years ago. The Ethereals were dying of thirst because their ancient technology had failed. Earth sent emergency supplies and engineering teams. Even though sharing technology with advanced species was strictly forbidden, the Galactic Council had issued warnings, but Earth ignored them and saved an entire civilization. Dr. Walsh was documenting everything on her computer. This is incredible, Alex. We thought we were helping a few species here and there, but it turns out we've touched lives across the entire galaxy. Every act of kindness we thought was small and local has created connections we never knew existed. Commander. Jake Morrison's voice came through on the secure channel from his position near the outer defense grid. Alex, you need to see this. The Xanthari just sent a battle fleet to disperse the alien ships around Earth, but the aliens aren't backing down. Alex rushed to the command center and watched on the tactical display as massive Xanthari warships approached the gathered alien fleet. The Xanthari ships were larger and more heavily armed than anything the aliens had brought, but the smaller vessels moved to form a protective ring around Earth anyway. This is High Admiral Keth Zarthan of the Xanthari Empire, a cold voice announced. All non-human vessels will depart Earth space immediately or be destroyed. You have 1 hour to comply. The response came from dozens of alien ships at once. Each captain spoke in their own language, but the universal translators made their message clear. They would not abandon Earth. They had come to repay debts of gratitude, and no threat would make them leave. Alex watched in amazement as the standoff continued. The Xanthari had enough firepower to destroy every alien ship around Earth, but doing so would mean starting a war with hundreds of species across the galaxy. For the first time since the crisis began, the Xanthari seemed uncertain about their next move. Dr. Walsh was monitoring communications from across the galaxy. Alex, the protests are spreading. Worlds that have never spoken against the Xanthari are calling for the charges against Earth to be dropped. Some species are threatening to leave the Galactic Council entirely if Earth is punished. Admiral Sullivan joined them at the command center. The Xanthari built their empire on the idea that order must be maintained at all costs. They never expected that so many species would be willing to risk that order to defend us. What happens now? Alex asked. Now we prepare for trial, Admiral Sullivan said. But for the first time since this started, I think we might actually have a chance. The galaxy is watching, and the galaxy remembers every time Earth chose to help instead of turn away. Alex looked out at the fleet of alien ships surrounding Earth and felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. These beings had traveled across vast distances just to speak for humanity. They had put themselves at risk to defend the very acts that Earth was being charged with. Whatever happened at the trial, Earth would not face it alone. The communication channels continued to buzz with new arrivals. Ships from the far reaches of the galaxy were still coming. Each one carried beings whose lives had been touched by human compassion. Each one was proof that sometimes breaking the law was the most legal thing you could do. The neutral station of Nexus Prime floated in the void between galaxies like a massive crystal cathedral built for giants. Ambassador Rick Johnson stood at the viewing port of the human transport ship, watching the station grow larger as they approached. He had been to many diplomatic meetings in his career, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The station was swarming with ships from across the galaxy. Xanthari warships hung in perfect formation around the docking bays, while civilian transports from hundreds of different species waited in designated areas. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying as Rick realized that the entire galactic community had come to watch Earth's trial. Ambassador, we're cleared for docking, Captain Morrison announced from the pilot's seat. Behind Rick sat lawyer Amy Preston with her files of evidence and testimony. She had worked for weeks preparing Earth's defense, but Rick could see the worry in her eyes. They were about to face a legal system that had never ruled in favor of a species like humanity. The docking process took hours as traffic control struggled to manage the unprecedented number of ships. When they finally entered the station, Rick was amazed by the size of the corridors. Everything was built to accommodate the largest species in the galaxy, and humans felt tiny walking through the vast halls. Judge Prime Vel Corthus of the ancient ethereal race was already seated when Rick entered the courtroom. The being was old beyond human understanding, with skin that seemed to shimmer with its own light. Its eyes showed the wisdom of countless centuries, but also the cold detachment that came with extreme age. The prosecutor, High Advocate Zek Therian of the Zenthari Empire, stood at his podium reviewing his files. His gray skin was marked with the ritual scars that showed his rank, and his black eyes showed no emotion. Rick had read about Zek Therian and knew the prosecutor had never lost a case in over 300 years of service. The trial of Earth versus the Galactic Council will now begin. Judge Prime Vel Corthus announced in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. High Advocate Zek Therian, you may present your case. The Zenthari prosecutor activated a holographic display that filled the center of the courtroom. Images appeared showing human ships and personnel engaged in activities across the galaxy. Each image was labeled with violation numbers and legal codes. Honored Judge Prime, the evidence against Earth is overwhelming, Zek Therian began. For 10 standard years, this species has systematically violated galactic law with complete disregard for proper authority. They have interfered in quarantines, provided aid without authorization, and shared restricted technology with primitive civilizations. The first piece of evidence showed human medical teams working on a plague-ravaged world. Rick recognized the images from the Corvan crisis, when Earth had sent doctors to treat a disease that was killing millions. The legal code floating above the image marked it as a Class A violation of quarantine protocols. The species known as humans provided medical aid to the Corvan homeworld despite explicit quarantine orders, the prosecutor continued. Their actions violated 17 separate health codes and endangered the entire galactic community by risking the spread of unknown pathogens. Amy Preston made notes on her tablet, but Rick could see her frowning. The prosecutor was technically correct about every violation. Earth had broken the law repeatedly, and the evidence was impossible to deny. More images appeared showing human engineers sharing water purification technology with the ethereal conclave during their drought crisis. Human soldiers freeing Thraxian slaves from corporate mining operations. Human scientists providing genetic therapy to Melody children born with fatal defects. Each of these actions represents a clear violation of established galactic law, Zek Therian declared. The humans claim they acted from compassion, but compassion does not excuse lawlessness. If every species decided which laws to follow based on emotion rather than reason, the entire galactic order would collapse into chaos. Rick watched the faces of the alien observers in the gallery. Representatives from hundreds of species sat in the massive viewing areas, and many of them were the same beings that Earth had helped over the years. Their expressions showed anger not at humanity but at the cold way their lives were being reduced to legal violations. Judge Prime Vel Corthus listened without emotion as the prosecutor presented each charge. The litany of violations went on for hours with detailed evidence of every law Earth had broken. By the time Zek Therian finished his presentation, the case against humanity seemed hopeless. Ambassador Johnson, you may now present your defense, the Judge Prime announced. Rick stood and walked to the defendant's podium, feeling the weight of his entire species resting on his shoulders. He looked out at the gallery filled with alien faces and then back at the ancient judge who would decide Earth's fate. Your Honor, we do not deny the charges against us, Rick began. Earth is guilty of every violation listed by the prosecutor. We broke quarantine laws to stop plagues. We shared technology without permission to save civilizations. We interfered in conflicts to prevent genocide. We are guilty of all these things, and we are proud of them. A murmur went through the courtroom as beings reacted to Rick's unexpected approach. The prosecutor looked confused while the judge showed the first hint of interest. "The question before this court is not whether we broke these laws," Rick continued. "The question is whether laws that prevent helping others deserve to be followed. We call our first witness Captain Zek Mora of the Corvan Republic." The small blue-skinned being walked to the witness stand with obvious difficulty. One of his arms was missing, and his face bore the scars of the plague that had nearly destroyed his people. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but his words carried across the silent courtroom. "3 years ago, my people were dying," Captain Zek Mora said. "The plague had killed half our population, and we had no cure. We begged the Galactic Health Council for help, but they said we must wait for proper authorization. The process would take years, and we would all be dead before it was complete." The captain paused and looked directly at the prosecutor. "Then the humans came. They did not ask for permission or wait for authorization. They brought medicine and doctors and saved my children's lives. According to your laws, they committed crimes, but according to my heart, they performed miracles." Amy Preston called witness after witness to the stand. Thraxian miners who had been freed from slavery. Melody parents whose children had been saved by genetic therapy. Ethereal engineers whose people had been rescued from drought. Each story was the same. Humans had broken galactic law to save lives, and the beings they saved would never forget. The testimony went on for days as species after species came forward to describe how Earth had helped them. The prosecutor objected repeatedly, claiming that emotional appeals were not relevant to legal proceedings, but Judge Prime Velkorthus allowed each witness to speak. By the end of the testimony phase, Rick realized something had changed in the courtroom. The cold legal atmosphere had been replaced by something warmer and more human. The gallery was no longer just observing, but participating as beings shared their own stories of human kindness. When the final witness finished speaking, Judge Prime Velkorthus called for a recess to consider the evidence. As Rick walked back to his quarters, he passed groups of aliens in the corridors discussing the trial in excited voices. For the first time since arriving at Nexus Prime, he allowed himself to hope that maybe compassion would prove stronger than cold law. Judge Prime Velkorthus returned to the courtroom after 3 days of deliberation. The ancient ethereal moved slowly to the massive judicial bench while thousands of beings from across the galaxy watched in complete silence. Ambassador Rick Johnson felt his hands shaking as he waited for the words that would determine the fate of his entire species. The courtroom had grown even more crowded during the recess as news of the trial spread throughout the galaxy. Representatives from species that had never before involved themselves in galactic politics had traveled to Nexus Prime to witness this moment. The viewing galleries were packed with beings whose lives had been touched by human compassion. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, this court has reached its decision, Judge Prime Velkorthus announced. His voice carried the weight of ages and showed no emotion. On all 847 charges of violation of galactic law, the defendant species known as humans is found guilty. The words hit Rick like a physical blow. Around him he heard gasps and cries from the alien observers, but the judge continued speaking in the same calm tone. The crimes committed by Earth include systematic violation of quarantine protocols unauthorized, sharing of restricted technology, interference in internal conflicts of sovereign species, and numerous other breaches of established galactic law. The evidence presented by the prosecution is overwhelming and cannot be disputed. Amy Preston closed her files with shaking hands. All their preparation and all the emotional testimony had meant nothing. The cold letter of the law had prevailed. Just as everyone had expected, Rick felt the weight of failure crushing down on him as he realized he had failed his entire species. The sentence for these crimes is complete isolation from galactic society, the judge continued. All human space installations will be dismantled. All human vessels will be impounded. The Sol system will be placed under permanent quarantine with no contact permitted between Earth and any other world. This sentence will take effect immediately. The courtroom erupted in chaos as alien observers began shouting protests in dozens of different languages. Security forces moved to restore order, but the beings in the gallery were too emotional to be controlled easily. Rick sat in stunned silence as his worst fears became reality, but then something unprecedented happened. Captain Zek Mora of Corvan Republic stood up in the witness section and spoke in a voice that somehow carried over the noise. If Earth is to be isolated, then the Corvan Republic withdraws from the Galactic Council, he declared. We will not be part of a system that punishes compassion. The courtroom fell silent again as the implications of his words sank in. A member species had just withdrawn from the galactic government in protest of a court decision. In 3,000 years of galactic history, nothing like this had ever happened. Then Ambassador Thilverith of the Ethereal Conclave stood up. The Ethereal Conclave also withdraws from the Galactic Council. We cannot support a system that makes mercy illegal. More beings began standing throughout the gallery. Representatives of the Thraxian Republic declared their withdrawal. The Melody Colonial Alliance announced they were leaving the council. Within minutes, dozens of species were declaring independence from the galactic government that had just sentenced Earth to isolation. High Advocate Zek Therian looked around the courtroom in shock as his victory turned into disaster. The Zenthari Empire had built their power on the unified support of hundreds of species, but that support was crumbling before their eyes. Admiral Kate Sullivan watched the proceedings from Earth through a secure transmission link. She turned to the officers gathered around her and spoke quietly. Begin evacuating all human personnel from the outer colonies. We need to get our people back to Earth space before the Zenthari fleets move against us. Captain Morrison was already mobilizing the evacuation ships when the first reports came in. The Zenthari battle fleets were moving toward human territory to enforce the court's sentence, but they found their path blocked by ships from the rebel species. The galaxy was splitting apart along lines that no one had imagined possible. Dr. Ben Carter was monitoring communications from across the galaxy, and the reports were astounding. Over 200 species had declared independence from the Galactic Council within hours of Earth sentencing. Entire sectors were breaking away from Zenthari control as beings chose to follow their consciences rather than their legal obligations. Admiral, this is incredible, Dr. Carter said as he reviewed the data. The Zenthari Empire has lost more than half their territory in a single day. Species that have been part of the Council for thousands of years are walking away. Commander Alex Turner was coordinating the defense of human space when he received an unexpected communication. Ships from the rebel species were arriving to help protect Earth from Zenthari retaliation. The same beings who had come to testify at the trial were now offering military support to the species. They had tried to save through legal means. Lisa Adams was working frantically to establish diplomatic contact with the breakaway species. The communication channels were overwhelmed as governments that had never worked together tried to coordinate their response to the galactic crisis. We need to organize this somehow, Lisa told Admiral Sullivan. These species are risking everything to support us, but without coordination, the Zenthari will defeat them one by one. The first battle came at the mining colony of New Brasilia, where Zenthari forces tried to arrest human personnel. But when they arrived, they found ships from 12 different rebel species waiting for them. The Zenthari commander faced a choice between starting a massive interstellar war or backing down from his mission. Dr. Emma Walsh was documenting the unprecedented cooperation between species that had never trusted each other before. Traditional enemies were working together under the banner of a new philosophy that put moral law above legal obligation. This is beyond anything we could have imagined, Dr. Walsh reported to Earth Command. The trial was supposed to punish U.S. for breaking the law, but instead it's created the largest political revolution in galactic history. Judge Prime Vel Corthus remained on Nexus Prime as chaos erupted around the station. The ancient being had presided over thousands of trials but had never seen a verdict create such immediate and dramatic consequences. The legal system that had maintained order for millennia was collapsing under the weight of its own inflexibility. Rick Johnson found himself at the center of a diplomatic revolution as representatives from the rebel species gathered around him, seeking guidance. They wanted to form a new galactic government based on the principles that Earth had demonstrated through its actions. "We cannot simply react to what the Xanthari do," Rick told the assembled delegates. "We need to create something better than what we're leaving behind. We need a system that values life over law and compassion over compliance." The galaxy that had seemed so orderly just days before was now divided into two hostile camps. The Xanthari Empire controlled the core worlds and the traditional power structures, but the Rebel Alliance was growing stronger with each passing hour as more species chose freedom over security. Earth had been found guilty of violating galactic law, but that verdict had become the catalyst for the greatest change the galaxy had ever seen. The humans who had been branded as criminals were becoming the founders of a new era, where doing the right thing mattered more than following the rules. 6 months after the trial that changed everything, Ambassador Rick Johnson stood before the first session of the Alliance Council on the rebuilt station of Freedom Point. The massive chamber buzzed with the voices of representatives from over 300 species who had chosen to leave the old galactic order behind. Where Nexus Prime had been cold and intimidating, Freedom Point was designed to welcome beings of all sizes and types. The transformation had not been easy. Commander Alex Turner now held the rank of Alliance Admiral and spent his days coordinating joint military operations between species that had been strangers just months before. The Xanthari Empire had not accepted the loss of their territory. Quietly, and border skirmishes were common as both sides tested each other's resolve. "The first item on our agenda is the establishment of the Alliance Charter," Rick announced to the assembled delegates. "We must create a government that learns from the mistakes of the past while building something worthy of the sacrifices that brought us together." Dr. Emma Walsh had been appointed as the Alliance's first science coordinator, and her job was to oversee the sharing of technology between member species. The old laws that restricted scientific cooperation had been the first casualties of the new order. Already amazing advances were being made as species combined their knowledge without bureaucratic interference. The medical breakthrough achieved by combining Corvin biochemistry with human genetic therapy has saved over 2 million lives this month alone, Dr. Walsh reported to the Council. "This is what becomes possible when we put helping people above protecting patents." The Xanthari Empire had responded to their losses by becoming even more rigid in their enforcement of the old laws. High Advocate Zektharian had been promoted to Supreme Commander and was leading increasingly desperate attempts to force the rebel species back into compliance. But for every world they reconquered, 2 more declared independence and joined the Alliance. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the Alliance flagship, Unity, which served as both a symbol of cooperation and a mobile headquarters for humanitarian missions. The ship's crew included beings from dozens of different species, working together in ways that would have been impossible under the old system. "Captain, we're receiving a distress call from the Ythron system," reported his communications officer. "Lieutenant Sam Parker, there's been a massive earthquake on their homeworld and they need immediate assistance." Under the old galactic law, providing disaster relief required months of paperwork and approval from multiple bureaucratic committees. Under the Alliance Charter, any member species could request help and expect an immediate response. Within hours, Alliance ships from across the sector were racing toward Ythron space carrying medical supplies and rescue equipment. Admiral Kate Sullivan had been elected as the Alliance's first Supreme Commander and found herself leading the largest voluntary military coalition in galactic history. The challenge was enormous as she tried to coordinate forces from species with completely different fighting styles and tactical doctrines. "The Xanthari are massing a large fleet near the Rigel sector," Admiral Sullivan reported during the daily security briefing. "Intelligence suggests they're planning a major offensive to cut our territory in half." The Alliance military was still learning how to work together, but they had advantages that the rigid Xanthari forces lacked. Alliance commanders were encouraged to adapt and improvise, while Xanthari officers followed predetermined battle plans that had remained unchanged for centuries. Dr. Ben Carter had established the Alliance Research Institute, where scientists from member species worked together on projects that would benefit everyone. The contrast with the old system, where research was carefully controlled and restricted, was remarkable. "We've made more scientific progress in 6 months than the galaxy saw in the previous 50 years, Dr. Carter announced during his monthly report. "When brilliant minds are free to collaborate without artificial barriers, amazing things happen." The economic transformation was equally dramatic. Lisa Adams now served as the Alliance Trade Coordinator and oversaw commercial relationships between species that were based on mutual benefit rather than exploitation. The Xanthari system had concentrated wealth among a few powerful species, while keeping others in perpetual debt. "Trade volume between Alliance members has increased by 400%, Lisa reported. "When people are free to exchange goods and services without excessive regulation, prosperity increases for everyone." But the most important change was not economic or military, but cultural. Species that had been isolated by the old system's emphasis on separate development were discovering how much they had in common. Art, music, and literature were being shared freely for the first time in galactic history. Judge Prime Velkorthus had remained neutral during the Galactic Civil War, but privately the ancient Ethereal was fascinated by what humanity had unleashed. The species that had been found guilty of breaking the law had created a new legal system based on principles of justice rather than rigid compliance. The Alliance courts operated on the revolutionary principle that laws should serve beings rather than the other way around. When Alliance judges found that a law caused more harm than good, they had the authority to set it aside in favor of what was right. Commander Morrison found himself leading rescue missions almost daily as the Alliance responded to crises across their territory. Natural disasters, pirate attacks, and refugee situations that would have been ignored under the old system were now met with immediate and effective assistance. "The difference is incredible," Morrison told his crew after returning from their latest mission. "Instead of asking whether we're allowed to help people, we ask how we can help them better." The Xanthari Empire was slowly collapsing under the weight of its own inflexibility. Species that remained loyal were questioning why they should follow laws that prevented them from helping their neighbors. Internal rebellions were becoming common as beings demanded the same freedoms that Alliance members enjoyed. High Advocate Zektharian issued increasingly desperate proclamations calling the Alliance members criminals and traitors, but his words fell on deaf ears. The galaxy had seen the difference between a system based on fear and one based on hope. Rick Johnson addressed the Alliance Council as their first year of independence came to an end. The chamber was even more crowded now as dozens of additional species had joined their cause. The momentum was unstoppable as word spread about a government that actually cared about the welfare of its citizens. "1 year ago, Earth was put on trial for the crime of compassion," Rick said to thunderous applause. "Today we celebrate the birth of a galactic civilization where compassion is not a crime but a cornerstone of law." The old Xanthari slogan had "In order through compliance," but the Alliance motto was different. Carved above the entrance to Freedom Point were words that summarized everything they stood for. "Sometimes the most legal thing you can do is break the law." The galaxy that had once applauded rigid order now applauded something far more precious. They applauded the courage to do what was right regardless of what the rules said. They applauded the wisdom to put life above law and people above policy. Earth had been found guilty of defying galactic law, and the galaxy had responded by giving them the greatest applause in history. The applause of beings choosing freedom over fear and hope over despair. The applause of an entire galaxy that had finally learned the difference between being legal and being right.